Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. We're analyzing John Steinbeck's Johnny Bear. This is part two of our analysis. Let's begin, shall we? So we left off. Let me get this adjusted for you. We left off our analysis with the narrator experiencing Johnny Bear firsthand with the story of he and May. You'll remember that? So Timothy Ratz won a game of solitaire. He piled up his cards and moved to the bar. We remember Timothy Ratz is the husband of Mrs. Ratz, where he takes a room. The narrator has a room. And Johnny Bear has been under the table, and he looked back at the table under which Johnny Bear lay, and he had moved on his stomach, his foolish, smiling face. Johnny Bear has a gift, if you'll recall, correct? So he rolls over, smiling, and his head moves up and down, and he looks around like an animal about to leave his den. The narrator often refers to Johnny as an animal, right? He's a monster. And then he came sliding out, stood up. There was a paradox. What's a paradox? That's a statement opposed to common sense. It doesn't make any sense. And the narrator's telling us that's what's a paradox about Johnny's movements. He looks twisted and shapeless, but he moves with a complete lack of effort, just smooth, right? So he creeps to the room towards the bar, smiling about. In front of the bar, his incessant question, "Whiskey? Whiskey?" It was like a bird call. I don't know what kind of bird, but I've heard it. 2 notes on a rising scale asking the question over and over. Whiskey? Whiskey? The conversation in the room stopped, but no one comes forward to lay any money on it. So Johnny smiles plaintively. Whiskey? Then he tries to cozen them. What's cozen? Trick them. Out of his throat, an angry woman's voice. I tell you, it was all bone, 20 cents a pound and half bone. And the man, yes, ma'am, I didn't know it. I gave you some sausage to make it up. I'll give you some sausage to make it up. Johnny looked around. Whiskey? But nobody's coming up because they're not paying for that type of information, are they? So he creeps to the front of the room and he crouches. And I whispered, what's he doing? Alex said, shh. He's looking through a window. Listen. So this may be pretty good, right? A woman's voice came, a cold, sure voice, the words clipped. I can't quite understand it. Are you some kind of monster? I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen you. Whatever woman is talking, she's using the word monster, which is interesting. Another woman's voice, probably the woman she's talking to, answered her, said in a low voice, hoarse with misery. Maybe I am a monster. I can't help it. I can't help it. You must help it, the cold voice broke in. Why, you'd be better dead. I heard a soft sobbing coming from the thick, smiling lips of Johnny Bear. Remember, he imitates people, not just their voices. Sometimes he'll do their expressions. So he's imitating now the woman sobbing. It's the sobbing of a woman in hopelessness. I looked around at Alex, and he was sitting stiffly, his eyes wide open and unblinking. I opened my mouth to whisper a question, but he waved me silent. I glanced around the room, and all the men were stiff and listening. This is good stuff Johnny's delivering. They're paying attention. Are you sitting stiff when we're doing this analysis? The sobbing stopped. Haven't you ever felt that way? Emmeline, there's a new character, Emmeline. Haven't you ever felt that way? Says the voice asking Emmeline. Alex caught his breath sharply at the name. The cold voice said, certainly not. So we have a cold and a sobbing voice, right? Never in the night? Not ever? Ever in your life? Said the soft voice. If I had, the cold voice said, If I would cut that part of me away. Now stop your whining, Amy. There's the other character. I won't stand for it. If you don't get control of your nerves, I'll see about having some medical treatments for you. Now go to your prayers. Johnny Bear smiled and said, "Whiskey?" Two men advanced without a word and put down coins. Fat Carl filled 2 glasses, and when Johnny tossed them off, Carl filled another one. Everyone knew how moved Carl was. There are no drinks on the house at the Buffalo Bar. That little episode, 3 drinks, 3 whiskeys. Johnny Bear smiled around the room, and then he went out with that creeping gait of his, and the doors folded after him slowly and without a sound. Even the doors have a movement to them that's not like, doors at a saloon. Conversation didn't spring up again. This is very interesting. Whatever these ladies are doing and saying to themselves, Emmeline and Amy, this got their attention. Everyone in the room seemed to have a problem to settle in their mind. This is the narrator telling this. He's observing these men now who are suddenly speechless. One by one, they drifted out, and the backswing of the doors brought in little puffs of tall fog. Remember fog? I told you, pay attention to the fog. Alex got up and walked out, and I followed him. This is one of the most beautiful sentences ever written. The night was nasty with the evil-smelling fog. It seemed to cling to the buildings and reach out with free arms into the air. Something's going on here in this town. And the narrator's obviously reading this into it, and he's imagining it. Whatever he's doing, he's giving a quality to the fog that's not just fog. There's something about this is not just fog. He doubles his pace, catches up with all, and he's asking, what the heck was that all about? And for a moment, he thought Alex wouldn't answer, but then Alex does tell him what that was about. Oh, damn it, says Alex. Listen, every town has its aristocrats, its family above reproach. Emmeline and Amy Hawkins, there's their last name, are our aristocrats. They're maiden ladies, kind people. Their father was a congressman, and I don't like this. Johnny Bear shouldn't do it. Well, they feed him, and those men shouldn't give him whiskey. He's going to haunt that house now that he knows he can get whiskey for it. So they gave him whiskey after he described what was going on. They're obviously 2 sisters having a discussion about something, right? You can go back and reread it, but it's about something about a feeling, right? I asked, are they relatives? He goes, no, but they're not like other people. They aren't like other people. They have a farm next to mine, so they're, the landowners. The Hawkins women, they're symbols. I want you to pay attention to the word symbols. They're what we tell our kids we want, to describe good people. They're symbols of goodness. And what Johnny Bear revealed was maybe a layer below that, when one was crying, sobbing, and the other one talking about whatever this person felt in the middle of the night. Well, I protested nothing Johnny Bear said could hurt them, would it? And Alex says, I don't know. I don't know what it means. I mean, I kind of know. Does he know? What does he know? Oh, go to bed. I didn't bring the fort. I'm going to walk home. And he turned and hurried into the slow, squirming mist. Wow. What a writer. But he's a narrator. I walked along to Mrs. Ratch's boarding house, and I can hear the chuttering of the diesel. So the 2 women's voices stopped them in their tracks, Emmeline cold, Amy sobbing. the growing importance of the fog. What was it about the conversation to women that stopped them in their tracks? Well, it's obviously eavesdropping because Johnny Bear doesn't, he's an eavesdropper, right? But what does Alex know and what does he suspect? Do we know? Is there something going on? There's something going on. Alex suspects something, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know for sure. And why doesn't he know for sure? Well, because Johnny Bear didn't tell him. Don't forget, Johnny Bear is a personification of truth. And right now, all we know is that the two sisters had a conversation. And they're symbols of goodness, of what they tell their kids to be, right? They're symbols. They look up to them. Let's continue. He thought about the two voices. He goes back to his room, the narrator. He thinks about the room. He says he could see the women. He can visualize them. Johnny Bear's gift gives you the ability, if you listen closely, to visualize them. Emmeline, the misery face of Amy. He wondered what caused the misery. He's thinking about this. The lonely suffering of a middle-aged woman? There's too much fear in the voice to be just that. So the next morning, he walks down to the swamp and the dredger. The crew is busy bending some new, right? So it sounds like the narrator is also a foreman. So he walks down to the dredger while the men are working. He looks over the job, and about 11, he goes back to Loma. He sounds like he's the boss, right? Sounds like he's looking it over. And he meets Alex, and they decide that, he's got some chickens. I knocked off a couple of chickens. Let's go to dinner. And he was happy to do that. And then you have this whole paragraph about the cook and how the narrator doesn't like the cook. He smoked Cuban cigarettes in a bamboo holder. There's something going on with the cook. And he didn't like the way his fingers twitched in the morning. Something's going on with the cook. So he's giving you hints about the cook that we'll find out later. And if you remember when we read the cook, what the cook is doing. The cook is actually smoking. I know this story takes place after Prohibition sometime, right? But he's smoking marijuana. And you thought marijuana was a recent development. In any case, he tells this little anecdote about a Catholic boy who said the sun shines always on a Sunday. So Alex said, as they're going back there, about the Hawkinses, he says, that's their house. So they pass the Hawkins house as they're going to have the chicken dinner, and a high, thick hedge of cypress surrounded it. Remember the cypress we saw? The high, thick hedge, like a wall, keeping things out of there, right? And he talks a little bit about that. It looked incredibly thick and strong, the cypress did. That hedge keeps the wind out, Alex shouted. And the narrator says, it doesn't keep Johnny Bear out. A shadow crossed Alex's face. He waved at the whitewashed square building standing out in the field. That's where the Chinese sharecroppers live. Good workers. I wish I had some of them. Interesting, isn't it? Okay. At that moment, from behind the corner of the hedge, a horse and buggy. So they actually see the Hawkins sisters. They come whipping around in their buggy. The buggy is polished, it's beautiful, it's shiny. He says the check rein was too short for the horses, in his opinion. Well, a check rein guides the horse. You'll see that in the definitions below. So he says, there they are now on their way to church. We took off our hats, bowed to the women, and they nodded formally to us. I had a good look at them, and it shocks the narrator. Why? They looked almost exactly as I thought they would. Johnny Bear was more monstrous even than I had known. There's the word monster again. Because if by the tone of his voice he could describe the features of the people, I didn't have to ask which was Emmeline and which was Amy. And he talks about how he knows the difference between them based on what Johnny Bear was saying. It seems strange that I don't know anyone in the world better than those two women. I put a note here. What? I want to reread that. It seems strange that I don't know anyone in the world better than those two women. That's a powerful sentence. Now, is he adding narration to add to the story? What's he doing? He's at first. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first person narrator. The first person narrator inside the story is subject to human. He's human. And when a person says that based on a conversation that they heard from Johnny Bear, who's the human tape recorder, and he sees him for the first time, it's a little strange to me that he says that. But we're going to accept it for what he says. And Alex is shouting. You see what I meant about aristocrats? And the narrator nods. It was a community would feel safe having women like that around. Loma, with its fogs, great swamp, like a hideous sin, really needed the Hawkins women. I don't know about you, but I think the narrator is getting into the story maybe a little bit too much, maybe not. But he's definitely building a case here because Loma needs these women. A few years there might do things to a man's mind if those women weren't there to balance matters. Balance matters. You know what Aristotle said about the golden mean, ladies and gentlemen, right? The golden mean is Aristotle's concept of you don't want to go too far one way or the other way. You want to stay in the middle because that's the safest path for you. Nothing to excess. Nothing to excess. So balance is in the mean, right? I don't know what the narrator's saying, but he's obviously saying something. Let's look at some notes I created for us. Foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is a concept in literature where it's warning or an indication of a future event. There's foreshadowing going on here. There's foreshadowing going on before when they first hear Johnny talk about Emmeline and Amy and Alex's reaction to that. I don't know what they mean. There's something going on. That's foreshadowing. Foreshadowing. And note the narrator's vivid description of the cook. We're going to talk about that. A check rein is the short rein looped over the hook of a saddle to prevent the horse from lowering its head. So, narrator maybe knows something about horses. So what is the purpose of the high hedge of cypress around the Hawkins house? What do you think the purpose of that is? Is to keep people out. And as the narrator says, you can't keep Johnny out. Well, of course, Johnny can go where he wants. He always goes where he wants. Nothing can stop him. And remember, the boys bring dogs on dates. So being and seeming, what is the difference? Holding your mouth straight or being straight? If we go back here and he's looking at the Hawkins women, Emmeline's mouth was straight by nature. Amy held her mouth straight. There's a big difference between seeming and actually being. Do you seem to be a good person or are you a good person? Do you hold your mouth straight naturally or do you seem to hold it straight? She held it. It is straight by nature. There's a difference, and the narrator subtly is telling us the difference between these two sisters. One is rigid. The other one is more flexible. Right? That's what that whole sentence is about. And why is that? Why does he tell us that? Because of something's going to happen. We know that if you read the story. But if you're reading the story carefully now and you haven't read the story, it's foreshadowing. Not only that, he's painting a picture with words of these people. Remember, there are no pictures. There are no photographs. So we have to use our imaginations when he's talking about this, which makes Johnny Bear so monstrous to him because Johnny Bear can just repeat what he said in the tones that he heard it, and it allows the person to visualize what the person looks like. What's an aristocrat? Well, an aristocrat is a member of the aristocracy, a noble, a person of manners, qualities, of privilege, of a superior class. Don't forget where the Hawkins sisters live. They live on the good side, right? The rich side, the landowner side. So they're an upper class, theoretically. Is there such a thing as an upper class, or is there just class? Well, the swamp people, they formed that reclamation district. They're digging the swamp out. They want a piece of the action, whatever. Pardon me. And what you're looking at is the aristocratic sisters. They're aristocrats. They're high class. They're what people look up to. They're the people that they tell their children, this is goodness, right? Okay. It's dinner. He has a good dinner. They have a good brandy. And he says, I can see why I can't see why you go to the Buffalo Bar when you got this good brandy. And Alex says, well, the buffalo is the mind of Loma. The buffalo is the mind of Loma. I want you to remember that. Loma, right? The Buffalo Bar is the mind of Loma. It's our newspaper, theater, and club. It's also more than that. Pardon me. It's the gossip sheet, right? This was so true that when Alex started the Ford and prepared to take me back, he knew we would go to the Buffalo Bar, and they do. As they go, they pass the doctor, Dr. Holmes, and he's coming down the road, and he stops. The oncoming car, they're in cars, pulled up because he couldn't get around us. So it's a tight road, one-lane road. Alex says, say, Doc, I was going to ask you to take a look at his sister. Alex got a sister, remember? She's got a little swelling in her throat. All right, I'll come back, but pull out of her way. I'm in a hurry. What's up? What's going on? Well, Miss Amy had a little spell. Trouble. Remember the foreshadowing? Alex squawked his car back. Okay. Get out of the way. And he goes back. He turns. I was going to remark about the night was clear when suddenly I saw the rags of fog creeping around the hill. There it is, ladies and gentlemen, the fog coming around the hill, sliming like slow snakes on the top of Loma. Loma? Buffalo Bars in Loma? Buffalo Bar is the mind of Loma? The fog is attacking the town. The Ford shuttered, stop in front of the Buffalo, and we went in. Fat Carl moved towards us, wiping his glass. What'll it be? Whiskey. What's that, ladies and gentlemen? Ritual. For a moment, a faint smile seemed to flit over the fat, sullen face, and the room was full. The dredger crew was there. He was probably on, the cook wasn't there. He was on the scow smoking his Cuban cigarettes. He didn't drink, which was making me suspicious. The old adage, women in the woods and logging in the honky tonk. An adage is basically an expression, a proverb or statement of truth. It was the quietest bar he ever saw. Now, it's not, why is it quiet? Well, remember last time what happened? They had this revelation, the 3-drink revelation of the sisters. And now the doctor's going to see the sisters, right? He says, Amy had a little spell. Don't forget. So Fat Carl made drinking a quiet, efficient business rather than a noisy game. Timothy Ratz, was playing solitaire. No chairs were available, so they stood by the bar, blah, blah, blah. And the doors open, and who walks in? Doesn't walk in, he creeps in. Johnny Bear, swinging his long arms, smiling foolishly, his square feet like cat's feet. Whiskey? He chirped. No one encouraged him. He got out his wares. He was down on his stomach the way he had been when he got me. Aha. The when he got me. Sing-song nasal words came out, Chinese, I thought. And then it seemed to me that the same words were repeated in another voice, slower and not so nasally. And Johnny Bear raised his shaggy head. Whiskey? He got to his feet with effortlessly. I was interested. Now, before we go further, I want you to think about this. It's very important. The narrator who's narrating could have said what Johnny Bear said. This is very important to understanding why this narrator is telling us this story the way he's telling us this. Because he obviously heard whatever Johnny Bear was saying, but he described it as the sing-song nasal words, whatever those words were. He got on his stomach the way he had been with me. And we know what happened when he got the narrator with May Romero, right? He not only repeated the words, he was repeating everything about it. The narrator didn't have to tell us everything about it, but he was definitely repeating things about it, right? But he at least gave us a clue of what the words were. But in this case, he doesn't. For whatever reason, he doesn't. And then it seemed to him that the words were another voice, not so nasally. All right. I was interested. I wanted to see him perform. Really? He's not of Loma. He's working with the crew that's working in Loma, but not of Loma. They're not the community. They're in the community for a specific job. But he's going to give him, I want him to perform. Perform. The word perform, I should have highlighted that. Let me do that. Perform. Does Johnny Bear perform or does he report the truth? Is reporting the truth a performance? So he slid a quarter on the bar. Johnny gulped it, and a moment later, I wish I hadn't. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were in the bar in Loma and you heard what you heard before and you lived in Loma, you would not pay Johnny Bear for anything anymore, would you? Would you? So the narrator has to bring out this next episode. I was afraid to look at Alex. Johnny Bear crept to the middle of the room and took the window pose. So he's took a window pose. He's listening at a window. The chill of voice of Emmeline said, okay, so now we're looking through the window. We leave the bar. We go to Johnny Bear's narration, which is third person, truthful narration, because Johnny Bear is only telling us the truth. And we're now looking in the window and Emmeline saying, she's in here, doctor. The narrator closes his eyes against the looks of Johnny Bear. He doesn't want to see Johnny Bear. It'll spoil the story. And the moment I did, Johnny Bear went out and Emmeline Hawkins, who had spoken. I heard the doctor's voice. And it was his veritable voice that replied. Now, how does he know the doctor's voice? Because he met him on the road. You said a fainting fit? Yes, doctor. There was a pause, and then the doctor's voice said softly, why did she do it, Emmeline? Why did she do what? There was almost a threat in the question. I'm your doctor, Emmeline. I was your father's doctor, and you've got to tell me things. Don't you think that I've seen that kind of mark on the neck before? How long was she hanging before you got her down? There was a long pause. Then the chill left the woman's voice, Emmeline's voice, and it was soft, almost a whisper. 2 or 3 minutes. Will she be all right, doctor? Oh, yes, she'll come around. She's not badly hurt. Why did she do it? Why did she do it? We're going to stop there. Save the remainder for the third part of the analysis. If you read the story, you already know what's going to happen, but let's pretend we didn't read the story and stop here and just think about this, right? This is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. The narrator is closing his eyes. He's listening in as Emmeline tells the doctor that Amy tried to hang herself. Talk about dirt. This is unbelievable. These are these aristocratic ladies that they all look up to. And now suddenly you've got an attempted suicide here through Johnny Bear. This is unbelievable. Let's look at some notes here. Johnny Bear becomes the third person narrator because he represents truth. This is very important to understand from the beginning since you met Johnny Bear. This is a beautiful technique that Steinbeck uses in writing this, and he's using first and third person narration. Johnny Bear can't lie. Who can't lie? The third person narrator. First person narrator can lie. When the first person narrator says, "I never knew two women more than I knew them," that may not be a lie, but it is certainly an exaggeration, unless he's saying that the power of Johnny Bear is so great. So note too, it's the narrator who pays for the information. None of the others came forward. The question you have to ask yourself in the analysis, ladies and gentlemen, is would they have if the narrator didn't? My guess is no. Why? Because you'll find, if you read the story, you know why they don't want to know this. The truth. Do you remember the movie For a Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson, where he plays the colonel? And there's that great interrogation by Tom Cruise when he's on the stand, and Cruise is drilling him and drilling him and drilling him. And finally, Nicholson says, Cruise says, "I want the truth." He says, and Nicholson goes, "You can't handle the truth." This is what this story is about, ladies and gentlemen. Whether or not the town of Loma can handle the truth. This is very important, not only to the town of Loma, but to you and I and everyone. Can we handle the truth? If we can, this profound question. It's a question that everybody should be thinking about. And not only that, what is the truth? What is the truth? Are these women aristocrats, symbols of goodness? What's a symbol? That doesn't mean it is. Does it seem to be good, or is it good? If it is good, why is she committing attempted suicide, right? Why is she attempting suicide? What's going on here? What's going on here? You're reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. Email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Hope to see you soon. Thanks again.